Trent, you want to kick things off with the agenda?
Sure. Yeah, we can start. So we've taken some time and I've tried to put all the ideas into a diagram. And I kind of wanted to take everybody go through the diagram, make sure we're all on the same page, give everybody a chance to talk a little bit about their opinions and where things are at. And then if you look over in the chat section, there's polls. I think anybody can actually create a poll. So at best, we'll also kind of collect some information and maybe come to a little bit of consensus that'll allow us to take some steps forward. And then we can decide if we want to do this again at some point to continue taking steps forward or whatnot. But I figured it'd be good to chat and see maybe if we can get closer to consensus over this time. So first, I'm going to just take 10 minutes to take you through the whole thing, right? Then 1500 is going to talk a little bit about the Treasury, what's in it, some of the assumptions people have been talking about. Then John's going to take a little bit of time to explain kind of like some of the models and some of the details here. And then I think taking 10 or 20 minutes for everybody to express their point of view would be good. So I invite people to come up. And it would be nice if the people that express their points of view were kind of a mixture between, people that are looking for restitution, the community at large, and maybe the team. So that's kind of the thing. And then hopefully at the end, we can have a little bit of discussions, use these polls, and come to some sort of an agreement about like what the next steps are. So with that in mind, let me just take you through this. So in the beginning of this, there's some money, right? There needs to be some funds allocated. There's this current BIP here now, right? That's talking about how much to allocate. There's 3 questions, and I've got the results here. You can also go look at them on the form. By the way, let me just repost this diagram, or it's up at the top of the chat. You can follow my mouse here. It's pretty easy to see it, so if that's easier for you, go for it. Okay, so the first question is, how much do we fund, right? And the funding comes in both USDC from the Treasury and Badger that's available from the Treasury. So that's kind of the first thing that we've been talking about, right? Then those funds go somehow between 2 different things. So some of it can be paid directly upfront to users, the USDC, right? And then like Poe has kind of mentioned that maybe it makes sense to swap some for Badger to give people initial boost. So like one of the questions is, do we want to buy some Badger here based on the systems to make sure people have boost, or should this be all Bitcoin, right? And then also these non-native assets, depending on the style of vault we use, could either be paid to the user or put into a vault and then given to the user. So fundamentally, there are 3 flavors of vaults here that we've talked about for kind of handling everything but the upfront payment, right? The first one, I guess the one on top, is called RemBadger. So the idea here is that all of the Badger, or some amount of the Badger that's available, goes into this vault, along with any Badger that we buy as seed capital, right? And then basically, this vault goes to users, and that's kind of ugly, and they can redeem. Right.
Do you want me to just go into the vault descriptions if you're going to go through that?
Let me just get through the whole thing, and then you can go through it. Let me just quickly, I'm going to take 10 minutes and just kind of go through the whole process, right? Then there's RemBTC, which has Bitcoin in it, and MTBTC, which has nothing in it, and it's a placeholder token. So then once that's all done, the restituted parties will receive some tokens, right, which will either be IBBTC or Badger from the USDC, plus these vault tokens, which represent, the right to future payouts and may have some of the initial capital in them. So then at that point, everybody's got some money, hopefully, and some tokens to represent, what they are owed. So then we kind of move here to the more long-term payout, right? We've talked a bit about this Treasury Farming thing, right? And so this is basically where the Treasury borrows USDC from Iron Bank, leverages it, and uses that to generate yields, which can then be paid out to the holders of these vault tokens. And then we're also talking about this Badger, right? How much Badger comes out of the Treasury and for how long. And so this Badger here also, right, can either be paid out over the tree, or if it's RemBadger, it can go into RemBadger, right? And so then that brings up these questions of like, should we do this treasury farming, right? And then for the Badger, like depending on the vault, do we want to split it? Do we want to boost it in terms of the emissions? And then do we want to send these Badger tokens into the RemBadger vault if there is one, or over the tree, and in what ratio, right? And then in the end, the idea is that all of these tokens also flow to the restituted parties. And so then what I would suggest, John, I think I've talked to Poe. I think we've captured all of the questions here. So John, do you want to just go through maybe and explain a little bit more detail about this stuff?
Sure. Yeah, I think part of it's more the context of this conversation. Obviously this is like a really hairy thing we're trying to sort out, and I guess this calls more to kind of like push what is difficult to handle just in RFS, hopefully over the hump. But basically, what we need to determine is like which we want to make sure that we're being fair to everyone involved, like the affected parties, Badger holders, the unaffected parties, and make sure that everyone feels like their voice is heard, so that when we move forward, like everyone's kind of on good footing. I think we've got some rough ideas that people are starting to kind of close in on, and it's just like how do we get over the hump so we can actually get a real plan in place to start executing. So I guess a couple things that to touch on first is just really, well, I guess we'll come back to that, Treating. So I want to make sure we do touch on like what is the next steps with the BIP, that how do we determine the actual numbers that will feed into it.
But that's the last 10 minutes, right? So let's
okay.
look at the agenda, right? Do you have anything you want to add to the intro, or then?
Yeah. So I'll touch on the vaults real quick. So what matters here is really like how these funds are deployed. So if we're gonna have this votes for, these are the funds we're gonna put towards restitution. While they are very similar, these three different approaches where, okay, everyone's going to get some token and it'll likely just be like 1-to-1 for every Bitcoin that they lost. There's different kind of, implications for each. One is like what is locked up. So which funds, what denomination of funds may be in that, held in that vault, such that if people withdraw, they forfeit future gains. So it's essentially locked. So for RemBTC, it's the Bitcoin that's part of the distribution. For RemBadger, it's the Badger that's part of the distribution. For MTBTC, there's actually no kind of incentive for redeeming because there's nothing to redeem. So one distinction with MTBTC specifically is that there's no incentive to ever redeem it. So we're going to be paying out into that evenly across the whole range of affected parties the whole time, where if we're tracking performance for something that's RemBTC or RemBadger, that will be something that people may redeem and can actually speed up for those that stay in the speed that we might approach getting back to like a 1-to-1 compensation. So that's one thing. So there's what assets locked. There's whether or not there's any incentive to redeem, and then there's how it interacts with Boost. So both on both sides of it. So if something like RemBadger actually counts as native towards the Boost, so people may be incentivized to bring more Bitcoin into the platform, or something like RemBTC, where we would actually be distributing Badger through the tree, and then we have to decide whether or not that distribution itself is boosted or not, which would, it being boosted would incentivize people to hold. So I think we just got to boil down to a couple of these specific questions of like, okay, what is it the most important thing, like incentivizing lockup, having any of these, redemption mechanics and things like that.
I'm just trying to time keep. So that's the 10-minute
Yep.
intro. Can we have 1500 do the state of the treasury, and then you've got 10
Let's do
minutes
it.
to explain all this stuff? Cool. Thanks.
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm just going to do an overview from like someone that has never seen the treasury at all before. Let's just call it 50 million in USDC. It's down from that USD, sorry. It's down from that because prices have dropped, right? So this is non-native assets. These are things like BTC, Convex, stable coins, Ethereum. And then the other part, which is not actually treasury, it's just uncirculating Badger supply, right? And so that's about, let's just call it 7 million, doing some accounting. And the important things are, we're paying out Badger to the team, to our partners, and in emissions. And you could just say that's approximately $1 million a year, or million Badger a year. And then we're paying USDC, on operating expenses like running software and things like that, and then paying the team. And so that, you could just say, is about $1 million to $2 million a year. And that would be without anything expanding, no growth, just like staying at the current rate. And then the rest of the funds, there's a total of about 17 million USDC, or sorry, a stable coin, that is split between DAI, USDC. I think there's like a tiny bit of Tether, but most of that is farming. And then the rest of it is sitting around, I think like 4 million is sitting waiting to be spent. And then we have a very small amount of Ethereum compared to our expenses. I think there's only 750 Ethereum around in the treasury compared to expected, between 1,000 to 2,000 Ethereum spent every year. So yeah, that's about it. I mean, the rest of it is like sort of farming. I would say that within the dog fooding, after we made this switch to IBBTC, there's some moves that could be made in the treasury to make it earn more money by putting things into IBBTC and CVX. But yeah, that's pretty much the overview of the treasury.
Okay, does anybody have any, before we just kind of move on, does anybody have, again, the votes here. So these are the things we've been talking about right now, right? And it seems like there's a strong split between like 150,000 and 2 million Badger, right? And then I guess this seems pretty clear. And yeah, maybe that's the only thing. So I think actually on the USDC, at least so far from polling, there hasn't been a whole lot of question. But are there any questions about this Badger that we want to get to?
Sure. The only thing I'd add here is I think everyone just needs to be conscious, because I got quite a few questions in DM yesterday and today around some of these results. And people just need to understand historically, this is an opportunity for people to signal certain things, but they're not reflective of what actually happens in the token vote, for the simple fact that anyone can sign up for a forum account and start pushing. They can sign up 100 times if they wanted to with different emails, and it's not Sybil resistant by any means. So even if you look at all the people that voted for the 2 million Badger distribution, if not all of them, most of them, just recently created accounts. So it's just, I just wanted to set that as we talk about, what's going to come and how things are going to be shaped, and not necessarily use these as, the official stamp of what everyone thinks the direction should be.
That's a really good point, right? Because based on that, like right now, if we were to say, okay, we're only going to include the ones with a lot of votes, we'd only put 2,750,000, right? And if all these people don't actually have much Badger and just signed in, then like the opportunity to maybe pay out a little bit more is gone. So I agree, we need to be conscious of the fact that this is a representation of the community sentiment and not like what people are going to vote for, what's likely to happen. Yeah, Johnny, we'll get to that at the end, but we can talk about like what the options are and the style at the end. So any other questions just from anyone about like the numbers? I know like there were some questions here about this, right? About like where these numbers came from and why these assessments were made. Has that been clear? Is that clear to everyone, or is there anything else that people want to ask about the state of the Treasury?
Hi, guys. Not so much about the actual state of the Treasury, more about I don't know if that idea has been discarded to remove some of the liquidity of the upper bands in the Badger, Rep Bitcoin, LP, or others that basically put sort of a price resistance on Badger price, and trying to thin liquidity on the upper price bands, as I said, and use some of that to either disperse the Badger that are there and add them to the ones that could be paid out on upfront, and Bitcoin likewise. And just a comment to the 2,750,000 votes here. I think that's why the team is, democracy is nice, but I think some influence of the team is still needed in terms of discarding the useless options in the vote, right? So 0, as I pointed out in the forum, is a shitty vote to give, although, you know, it maybe needs to be there. And 2 million, if that's just too much, then, you know, obviously you don't need to go there as well. So some sort of control of feasibility by the team is obviously needed. But then there's a bunch of other tokens here that in the treasury, like the Gitcoin is Sushi, some Convex, like just some small stuff that may add up. So is there a chance to just clean that, clean house in treasury?
So I think there's two different things though, which is one is treasury management, which I've been, you know, part of this has been a little bit more focus from the community and the team on the treasury, which I was already putting in efforts to optimize before any of this happened. So I think, yeah, as far as optimizing the treasury, that's possible. The big question is, are we trying to take so much out of the treasury that it has to be optimized before we can take it out, right? Because if that's where the 10 million that I've been focused on with others in the community and the team number came from, which was those are the funds that can be taken out of the treasury right now without very much work as far as rebalancing and optimization. So if you want to start taking more than 10 million, then yes, we have to have some serious discussions about where to take it from. But no, I would argue that all those things that you're talking about are actually the last things that I would want to pull from. So the only time we would need to have that discussion is if the community wants to take more than 10 million of non-native assets out of the treasury.
I'd also just add to the point that you made around like the team's involvement in helping shape certain things. So I think it's really important that the community drives a lot of these conversations, and obviously the team as contributors and community members themselves need to be involved in this. I think to point out something, you know, and I think this is where things get a little difficult, right? Because of the distribution of those affected versus non-affected. For example, yesterday, you know, there was the first iteration of this bit put forward that didn't include the 2 million and 1.5 million Badger, and it also didn't include the 15 million and 20 million worth of stablecoin allocation or additional over the 10 million that was approved in BIP 81. And that was a process of, you know, multitude of conversations, primarily led by 1500, who was just speaking, with those most affected that, you know, had somewhat of a consensus around the parameters for initial amount that would satisfy some of their requirements, along with you know, the longer term amount, and most importantly how it affects Badger as a whole and the protocol moving forward. But upon that being posted, there's quite a bit of feedback around those numbers not being included by a few different people. So it was readjusted and resubmitted. And this is, you know, the process of, I guess, different people on the team that have been very involved with the community, trying to parse information and consensus, although very difficult in an RFF process and on Discord, hence why a conversation like this is important. And then, you know, kind of driving that forward. But that obviously didn't work. So just wanted to share that.
So just let's move on, because I think like the stable thing is a little clearer, but a lot of the questions, I think, you know, the community is concerned about the Badger and dumping. And so a lot of that then has to do with these vaults. And then again, we've got a half hour to talk about stuff. So John, do you want to now take a little bit of time and kind of elaborate on the vaults and this part of the world?
Sure. So, you know, I already went into it a little bit, I guess, as far as the distinctions and just, you know, through this whole process, and especially thinking right now, like, I think you need to kind of start, you know, really considering what these final votes are going to look like. And I mean, I guess one thing, and maybe people want to chime in on this now or in a little bit in a more open form, is do we want to go through this like parameter by parameter type voting, or would we rather, or people rather, the team kind of use their best judgment after talking to the various groups and put together one or two maybe more fully formed proposals that include, this is the token model we're going to use, this is the amount of Badger, this is the amount of initial distribution, and put it more forward as like a yes no, because
I would just add that it's common practice with equities that shareholders can vote however they want on the options, but that the board presents their view on their opinion, and then the board actually presents the options that they would pick.
Yeah. So anyways, I don't know, people, if you want to throw it in the chat, just interested to hear people's direct feedback on that. But as I stated before, like there's kind of 3 vaults that we've settled on that have different, not necessarily pros and cons, but depending on your perspective, pros and cons. So that's, I think, one of the last things we need to kind of settle on is what is the best model here. So people want to maybe go in that polls tab. So if you open up the chat, at the top of the chat where it says chat, next to it, it says polls. I'm going to go in there, put it in there. Maybe what you think. I'd be interested to hear if anyone has specific questions on the 3 models, pros, cons. Like I've heard, after talking to people, largely the most, unsurprisingly, the most vocal people coming out of this have been those that were affected by the exploit, and it seems like there is, people in that group that are for or against either one of these vaults. So the RemBTC, RemBadger, or MTBTC. So go ahead,
I do want to point out that there's been we've been talking a lot about all the things we don't agree on. I think that there is one thing that we do agree on, which is that if we pick a model, then picking the parameters to the model becomes much easier, right? Am I correct in that thinking?
People have different opinions on it. I was more model first, and then we decide on parameters, but I think Poe and Tritium were pushing kind of parameters first. That's why it's hard to kind of distinguish. Now, that being said, I mean, based on discussions, I think there's kind of general parameters that are starting to make sense as far as where people on both sides, or on all sides, I consider it, the people that were affected by the exploit, the people that were not affected by the exploit, and the team, as far as, opinions on what would work and would be a reasonable solution. I think some of the parameters are starting to kind of fall in line, and we're just trying to figure out how to get appropriate governance around it, right? So that's kind of, I guess, the question. Do we want to, first of all, are there any questions on the models? Pros, cons. There's also if you scroll all the way to the top of the chat, there's a link to the Badger compensation plan modeling page. It has a distinction, kind of the breakdown between all 3 of them. 2AX, go for it.
I think the funding has some hard caps, right? So there are natural barriers as to how far we can go in terms of funding. So I think the funding is probably easier to figure out how much can we spend up front, how much can we leverage as a loan, how much do we want to pay out, and then we can adapt the timelines and the delays or the lockup periods and yada 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 to the model. Because I think, for example, with the RemBadger is obviously a different beast than RemBTC in terms of Badger allocation and that stuff. In the end, it needs to come out to roughly the same volume bottom line, and I think it does, more or less.
Can I just throw something out there so that everyone is clear on this? In these vault flavors, right, the RemBTC and RemBadger vaults both create some sort of an empty hands game, right? So as John was saying, it allows people to pull out early. That means that that means they stop getting paid back. Everybody else gets paid back faster, and potentially, like the DAO, is then paid back everyone faster, right? And so the 2 diamond hands games, right? There's empty BTC, which is no diamond hands game, right? Like everybody would hold this forever. There's RemBTC, which creates the diamond hands game around the initial investment of BTC that came from the funding. And then there's this RemBadger vault that creates a diamond hands game around the Badger that is being emitted over time. And I think that that's the simplest way to think about these 3 options.
Yeah, and calls out in the chat. I mean, the important thing with all of these is also just, we would track all of them. And, we'd want to be clear kind of what the criteria are for reevaluating the program. My general stance is that it would make sense to evaluate in a year or when we've approached some percentage of payback, whichever happens first. And how we track that percentage of payback, I think there's a couple of different options that we would just have to kind of keep presenting, when we're valuing these different assets that are being distributed, because it's not all going to be, BTC denominated. It's not just going to be easy, okay, this it's 1-to-1 and then we're done. There's going to be, Badger and possibly other assets that are, going to users. And then we needed to, price those at time of distribution. And we can also price them at time of running the report. And kind of provide those two numbers. And then, you can evaluate it back to the dollar value of what was lost per the user at that time, or the Bitcoin value. And, how fast progress is made on either one will be determined based on, the prices of those assets relative to Bitcoin over the next year, which none of us know. So to solidify that, I think regardless on either one of these, we'll just have that wording in there and say this is basically on top of this solution. We will also provide reporting, and then we'll have a rough guidelines for when to reevaluate the program. And it's one of those things like, okay, great, Badger moons at some point this year. We can say that the dollar value has roughly been returned. Like someone can put forward a BIP and say, hey, are we cool? Like based on these parameters, slowing down, scaling back, stopping, whatever. Or if it doesn't, and we're still just grinding away at it a year from now, we put forward another BIP that says, okay, let's either top up and continue or pause based on these criteria. So I think that we can handle either way. So yeah, that's my answer to your recovery unit of account question. It's unfortunately it's not going to be like, I don't think there's any way to make it like a super clear thing. I'll go through, I guess, the pros and cons a little bit. Like, I always kind of lean towards having something that incentivizes some level of redemption, because if we're going to be reporting on what has been distributed, I would always look at, what has been distributed to those that remain in the vault. So for every, one Badger, $1, one Bitcoin that we're distributing to the affected, if there are people that have redeemed and gotten out, then each one of those units of value becomes more valuable. And that would mean that the RemBTC, which basically is we slam some BTC in the Vault token, it's denominated in BTC, and we distribute everything else through the tree. And now we can talk about, once we actually get to the votes, which I think are going to be pretty clear as far as how we generate, further value to direct towards these, like what denomination we use to distribute them. And we can do that in the native token, convex curve, or we can do it in BTC itself and figure out some swapping mechanism with like partners or whatever. That will drive up that base value of that unit of token up in BTC terms. But if you want that Bitcoin, if you want to get it out, then you forfeit future emissions. So that's like the diamond hands thing that Treasury was commenting at. And then for RemBadger, it's kind of flipped on its head, where any Bitcoin we're distributing through the tree, you can claim whenever you want. But the Badger that's been distributed, you have to forfeit future, if you want to claim that Badger, you have to forfeit future distributions to do so. Downside is that could create like a cliff of Badger being claimed if everyone holds, and then we stop the program in a year, then everyone claims their Badger at that time. So that would be the, holding it, but there might be, if Badger doesn't moon and there isn't like this incentive to redeem along the way to get some of your assets back, maybe then there's a big drop off at the end. There's still utility for Badger, it's still in Badger Boost, etc. For RemBTC, it would be, you would be getting the Badger along the time frame, and what we could do to incentivize holding it is distribute it via at least partially, at least through the boost mechanic, meaning you have to hold Badger relative to what you have in that vault to receive more of the Badger. So hopefully people wouldn't just be like dumping it along the way. So yeah, those are the breakdowns. Happy to run through any questions on any of them specifically. And then I just want to kind of sort out on this call, hopefully how we can get to the answer. Do we just have a, single choice snapshot vote on model and move forward with that, or work on more fully formed proposals with, one or two of them? Or is there one that people hate? Let's see how's the poll going here.
Well, so yeah, I mean, there's 12 people that responded to the poll, and only 2 people said anything different besides RemBTC. So I wonder if those 2 people want to just say on stage what their opinion is for against it.
Just 1 second. Let's move to that stage. I'm just trying to make sure we do this in a process when I'm mindful of time. So we're moving into the QA thing. The 2 questions that are listed here that we have not yet discussed is this. I guess the main question here is the this thing about this CodeMe. So CodeMe was one of our community members, came up with some software and suggested, and I guess the haircut, and suggested some sort of a pro rata distribution of Badger and of the rewards, right, in different ways, and it proposed some things, and there seemed to be some consensus around it. And so I'm not, I guess, should that be in a BIP or should that be in another BIP? That's one question we need to answer. And then in the, documents that actually came from the affected, there was some talk about a haircut, right? And so then that's the other question is, should there be one? And is that something we want to think about now or think about later when we're evaluating where this program's at? So with that, I guess go ahead to EX, and if anybody else.
Thanks. So the haircut idea is basically comes from anticipating the extra Badger emissions, right? So basically, what the protocol spends in additional Badger emissions over 1 or 2 years, let's say make it 1 or 2 million. It doesn't really matter. That could then be deducted from the debt that's owed, right? So basically, so nobody in this group that is affected wants 100% of their debt back, and then some upfront payment, and then some additional Badger, right? So the haircut is a parameter that only makes sense in the RemBTC model, and only insofar. So I think we valued Badger at 27 when we came up with the model, and based it on 110 million debt, and so saying 1 million at $27 is around about 25% ish. So we could imagine taking a haircut if we get those Badger over a year, right? Obviously, that in parentheses, in quotation fingers, saves the protocol some money because Badger trades at 15, not at 27. So basically, you're paying back 25 million with 15 million. So that's one of an incentive for the protocol to spend additional Badger, right? So you also have to see it from that way. It's not only an expense, it's also a way to shorten the process. It may incentivize smaller victims to pull out quicker because they only have half a year to wait until they are halfway there already because they only lost 50K or so. And then that makes it easier for the big victims to stay in a diamond hands it also then with the boost of these added Badgers.
So just be clear, are we talking about the model where smaller users get a proportionally larger amount relative to larger accounts, or is it more just for tracking the total?
It's a flat 25. Okay. So in the initial idea that came from our group, and also in the group there are people that are against it, quite obviously. I suggested 25%, 20-25% ish, because that kind of lines up with the Badger evaluation at the time of the exploit. And then I was made aware of this logarithmic thingamajig, which is basically I don't know if they're in this call. If so, I'm sorry. It's basically just a smart way to cut Celsius a decent chunk out, right? Because I think
the distribution is going over a couple orders of magnitude, right? So if you take the log of it, instead of having the scaling going up, it's just going to be like 1, 2, and 3, like groups of people basically getting chunks of money, and the smallest group would be made the largest percentage.
Right. And also I have obviously my personal preferences. I am number 9 in the list, so obviously I am not really in love with the log model. As far as I understand it, I would eat the 25%, but again, then that's up for vote. I don't have any badger, obviously, because it's not enough to make a dent in the vote. So I'm at y'all's mercy anyhow. I just can voice what the thinking behind the different models was.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, my personal preference has always been to kind of make it as even as possible, but always keep an eye out for like more just like gas considerations and other things. Or if we're going to be distributing certain things, like, I don't know, I would be supportive of like a minimum or something like that, but we'd have to see how it plays out with the actual numbers. I wouldn't want to like affect anything.
Since we're talking of them, did Celsius in any way, shape, or form communicate with the team what their preferred model is? Do they take any part of this?
I think I saw that they said GM.
They tweeted the thing yesterday.
No, I mean somebody from Celsius said GM at the beginning of this call. Oh no, that's Cassius. Sorry.
Chris,
Chris,
are you here? Do you want to chime in on the Celsius perspective or just conversations?
Yeah, so we've had a conversation with them just to understand their stance, and their overall stance is they want to support the Badger protocol moving forward, and they favor a restitution plan that's a mix of an initial coupled with as we've been calling it in our community, the extraordinary payback or reward mechanic. So that's, they're kind of in line with what the community's been talking about. Numbers specifically, I've continued to encourage them to join the conversation. Hence, they're them taking upon themselves to try and engage their community for the proposal that was up yesterday. But from the conversations I've had, they've at least suggested that these models, not to the specifics, not RemBadger or this BTC, that the conversations haven't progressed there, and I don't think it makes sense to have those conversations behind closed doors in the first place. So it's continued to kind of push to get involved more in the community, but at a high level, that's what they've suggested.
So John, do you want to really quickly, because you brought up a good point here, right? So one thing we haven't talked about, and I think this is important for the community, right, is like boost and how this Badger doesn't get dumped right away, right? Because it's not very appealing for Badger holders, to emit a bunch of tokens and have it being sold right away, right? And the two tools we have for that would either be RemBadger or otherwise like boost. And so, John, do you want to talk a little bit about like how we could use boost to prevent dumping and make it a little bit more appealing for the community to vote for more Badger here?
Yeah, I mean, so boost with, like I said, boost can be looked at in two ways, and boost isn't always the most like straightforward thing. But thinking about like RemBTC, we can think of it as a non-native vault, just like anything else. And you can have the Badger being distributed to it via either pro rata, just based on holding, or boosted, so based on holding relative to deposit. Now the tricky bit there is if it's in the same address with a bunch of other Badger stuff, it all kind of goes into the mix. We don't really have like vault specific, like we can't denote this Badger that you earn versus this other Badger, and we can't have like vault specific boost necessarily. So it's a bit tricky. And if we don't have it boosted, then for those holding it, there's not much of an incentive. Well, there's less incentive if you're not bringing assets in from the outside to hold on to that Badger, which, if we're just, if I'm just putting myself in the shoes of someone who wasn't affected by this and is a Badger holder, Badger user, I would like to, as that person, know that there is some incentive to, hold Badger here. So I think that's the one thing that we want to just sort out, whether it's partially boosted emissions and things like that. And then, that also makes it trickier for evaluating distribution to folks. There's been talk about this, the haircut component. That honestly doesn't really like jive with me that well, as far as like considering, okay, Badger is 25% of this, and we're going to kind of take that out, or haircut it.
The idea behind it is that you would be making a large number of users mostly whole, and then it would be you're dealing with just a handful of users. But I don't think that really makes anything any easier. So
yeah, well, no, the thing is, like, how are we starting to it starts becoming that some users are, yeah, like you said, becoming more or less whole. And then how are we evaluating it? Are we evaluating it based on the most whole made user? And then it becomes this other kind of incentive for, accumulating more of the emissions. So it's, so the 2AX, just to touch on the RemBadger and why I was kind of a preference of that, is that, we put the Badger in RemBadger, and we can do even a chunk up front into it and then distribute the rest of it into RemBadger. And then RemBadger counts towards your native balance, and boosts whatever Bitcoin you have there. And then we would distribute any Bitcoin restitution through the tree. So you claim that, and then obviously that itself is boosted. But you're sitting on this. Now you're earning emissions on that just like you would anything else, because we'd be distributing this stuff as like the IBBTC, SBTC, LP set token. So you'd have that, and you'd be earning boost on it. And then you would be incentivized to bring more assets into the platform, or do more deposits, because you have this thing that you don't want to redeem, because if you redeem it, you're kind of going to be giving up on these extraordinary emissions over the next year or so. But you can use it, it counts as native, so you bring other assets in the platform and earn boost with those. And the RemBTC plus RemBadger, it would just be hard, like a lot harder to track, because we have this, I don't see where RemBTC would really fit in with it, because then we'd have two things that we would be emitting emitting streams of value to.
So I just want to, we've got 50 minutes and we can go a little late, but the team has spoken a lot. The affected have spoken a lot, but like I haven't heard anything really much from like the community or from, like the majority of the Badger holders that are actually going to be voting. So I'm interested, does anybody that maybe isn't super involved in this, do you have any thoughts on this or anything that maybe like you'd like to share to help everybody have a little bit more context, right? Because you've been the silent majority, and it would be good to hear some of those voices. Anyone? Guess not. Okay.
Yeah, maybe we could just have a moment of silence for the silent
let's take
majority.
A moment of silence and say, sure, nobody?
So, to fill the silence, I guess maybe coming out of this, I just want to have some kind of clear plan. And it does seem like in the polls, there is some support for just like, and obviously it's, 9 plus like 14 total people. So it's not like it's like everybody, but, obviously it's people that care enough to make it on the call, about, how we actually move forward. Like, would people maybe want us to just put together more of a smaller, like, which we've kind of already done as far as like working with some of the affected users, but maybe try to shake out a couple people that weren't affected that want to also weigh in, and have a smaller group that just like, hey, let's just hash out what we all think is the best, proposal or 2 or 3 here that these 3 groups kind of agree to, and then put forward a vote on those, versus going through the different parameter votes, which, to be honest, like the numbers I've heard people say are all circling around the same numbers. So like, I don't see necessarily I know it's like, okay, the silent majority and things like that, but there's been a lot of time for people to speak up and like, say this number is ridiculous or this number is better or whatever. But I think we put appropriate wording around things, and when we can evaluate it, like, we can kind of, like, I don't know necessarily the benefit of having parameter votes other than just like to rubber stamp.
So let's take a minute and let's think about it. So I'm just going here over to the polls, right? And so like, there's some clear things here, right? It seems like there's a lot of people like RemBTC. If you look at how to structure things, most of the people are saying the multiple complete proposals to select from, right? And then everybody's also kind of saying model first. So my take from this right now is that it would maybe make sense to just come up with 2 or 3 proposals. So, let, for example, the group that's been coming together come up with like 1 or 2 proposals. Let the team come up with a proposal, right? Write some sort of a comparison, and then run a vote to let people like select between one of those 3. Does that, I mean, and I think that would give us like, it makes the current bit a little pointless, right? It means everybody needs to come back and come up with some proposals, but we could do that in the next 48 hours, right? Throw them up on a snapshot, vote, and call it a day. How does that sound to everyone?
I would say 24 hours.
Okay.
Well, Trip, the question is how different is the proposal that you're suggesting the team would put forward versus the smaller group that's been working on something? Because from what I understand in the conversations at least that I've had, I know 1,500, everyone's had all these conversations. They're pretty darn close. Like it's not like they're on other spectrums of the world.
I don't.
I mean, what we could do is for just like more detailed write-ups with, you know, on RemBadger and RemBTC,
Right.
and then make those the votes. And so I think the parameters I don't think are far off.
Right. So, but then we're voting parameter by parameter, right? Or do we want to vote on the whole thing? So, Chris, to answer your question though, if I look here, right, I'm just looking down here at the votes, right? So what I see is that most of the team and a lot of it, like the Badger community seems to think 750K, right? And then like most of the affected seem to think like 2 million, right? So
That's not true.
I do.
That's not true.
No.
No.
Okay.
Look at the people in the 750 bucket, right, or in the million bucket. Those are the people. That's Johnny. That's people like that, right?
Okay.
But
So
let's just, everyone's here. Let's just ask. Like, I don't understand. Everyone's literally in this call. Like, so do you guys think it makes sense to have different proposals? Do you think it makes sense to collaborate on a singular proposal that encompasses everything, or do you think it makes sense to focus the proposals on the models first with more context, and then move towards, you know, how you fit numbers into that? Of course, leveraging some of the signals that came out of the proposal yesterday. What's the feedback here from folks that are very vocal in the Discord? So like 2A, SG, Johnny. What do you guys think? I can respect if you don't want to speak, you can type.
You know, you could also set up if you can make a poll with those 3 questions, then we get like a whole bunch of response and it's maybe easier. So if you could go to create poll and create one, also people can speak, but that could be a good way to just quickly get answers.
Yeah, I'm on my phone. It won't let me do the polls.
Okay, so I can do it then. What was I might already be here, but
So I think it's all encompassing, like next steps. Is it all encompassing proposal or models? And then subsequent to that, if it's all encompassing proposal, should that proposal be singular in a collaborative effort between the team, the greater community, those affected, which I tend to think we're pretty close to what that could look like, or separate proposals from different groups? All encompassing proposals.
okay, so I've got a question. It says next steps: 1 proposal up, down, multiple proposals, select between, and figure out model in snapshot, then parameters, right? Because I think that's parameters. Okay, let me just send this poll and send. Okay, so yeah, if everybody could go, it's on the bottom there.
Does anyone, while we wait, does anyone want to share their opinion over voice or not really?
You know, let me just ask another question because maybe we can end this. So Paul keeps talking about like buying Badger with the dollars, right? Under the idea that if you distributed RemBTC, for example, and people had no Badger, then they would have no boost, right? And the only way, if assuming you don't have other money, the only way that you could get boost would be to pull out of RemBTC, surrendering some of your future yields in order to get the Badger. I guess I'm interested. If we're doing RemBTC, do you guys think that we should spend half the money or some of the USDC on Badger in order to provide like boost up front, or better to like let people either buy Badger themselves or have Badger or else just not get much?
Yeah, just to, I guess, call out what's going on in the chat here, thinking about it a little more, the RemBadger plus RemBTC may not really be that complicated or crazy, where if we were to do some percentage of the badger up front, we do that in RemBadger, and basically just give everyone that token. And instead of emitting badger through the tree, we just put it into the token. And then if they claim their badger from that token, then they forfeit future badger emissions.
Okay, so
and then
basically, just so that I understand, like looking at this diagram, what we would do is instead of buying badger, right, we would emit basically enough RemBadger so that they had 100% boost up front, right? And then we would pay out over that. And if they wanted to redeem it, they could. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I don't know if it would be, targeting 100%, or like we see how the percentages or whatever shakes out. But yeah, it would be basically, so let's say if the $10 million vote won for the Bitcoin or the 100%, we take, 100% of that Bitcoin, slam it into RemBTC, give that to people. And then we, let's say like 1 million was the amount of badger. We take, some upfront amount, whether we track that back to dollar value to be 100% roughly boost, or if we just say like 20% or some amount, and then we put that into RemBadger. And then with the rest of it being distributed into RemBadger over the next year, and then they have these two assets, one native, one non-native. And then for anything else we distribute, we just have to figure out, does that go into the RemBadger, or does that go into RemBTC, or is it emitted to holders of one or the other, as like native, curve or convex?
I like that better, right? Because I really, to me, like taking treasury assets and buying badger with it to emit to people, I don't know. I would imagine if I were affected, like that would not make me happy. So like the RemBadger, that sounds like a better solution. I agree.
Yeah, they may get there.
I think the mechanic there, John, this idea that, and then I've had a few conversations with those affected, and the sentiment from them was like, we want a percentage of the Bitcoin that we lost back in Bitcoin, and not have that tied to, our ability to stick with the protocol or not. And we just want some level of immediate restitution type thing. If that comes in IBBTC or whatever it comes in, that's fine. But this could potentially, if you isolate those two things, that could potentially satisfy that requirement where it's like, okay, you know what? I have a boost. If I stick with this, I'm earning, 40% on my IBBTC or whatever the number is, which is a great way for, continued restitution, along with, I get future badger. But if it's like, you know what, I don't want that, I'm just going to take the Bitcoin that I have and the immediate badger that I've received and leave, then they miss out on that badger piece, but it doesn't really affect their ability to get some type of restitution around their Bitcoin.
Yeah, just to be clear, I think the end condition with one RemBTC equal to one BTC would be, that's a hard no in my opinion, just because you're also getting a large slug of badger. It would be completely ignoring the value of badger distributed.
That's exactly where the haircut comes in, sir. That's to eliminate that problem.
What you're reducing though is like, I'm just gonna be frank with you. I would have a very hard time seeing how it would ever actually get back to 1-to-1 if we're discounting the value of the badger being distributed at the time of what it is. I think it's pretty clear here that the best outcome for people that have been affected is a dramatic rise in the increase in the badger price. And if that happens, then the increase of that is completely lost in this model of the badger that's been distributed to people. So I don't think that would fly, in my opinion.
Sorry, real quick. I just want to be mindful of people's time, right? We're on an hour and we can keep going. But just really quickly, because I would like to come back to next steps. So Chris, to answer your question, you can't see the proposal, but we asked it. It was split basically 3 ways down the middle, with multiple proposals selected between winning and also I think having the most votes from the affected. So I really think here, my personal suggestion hearing this is that it probably makes sense to come up with 2 or 3 proposals to give basically anybody that wants to the chance to like write a proposal, do like a sanity check on that, and then run like a snapshot between those proposals if everybody's okay with that. Because I think in the affected there might be like maybe like 2 major points of view that could both become proposals, and I think like the team.
Are these proposals in your eyes complete proposals with
Yes.
number parameters?
Yes. Complete proposal with number parameters. Here's 1, 2, 3. Like, let's vote, and then it's done, and we're gonna do that because I'm tired of this. And I think that seems like, like everybody's talked about this a lot. There's different ideas. Like I think that's the best way forward. And it seems like that's kind of where.
So there would be a deadline type thing that by this
Yeah, so
day-
I would propose a deadline of Thursday. I personally, and then maybe a couple other peoples on the team could commit themselves to working with whatever group to just I just go through and do any final edits and stuff with that, so that we make sure that we don't get anything that gets posted, like yesterday again, where there had to be a whole bunch of iterations and stuff like that. But yeah, and then on Thursday we start the voting, then we vote, and then of course, I mean that's the whole point of all this this experiment that we're all part of, is that if it gets really bad feedback, then we'll do it all over again. But it seems like that's what everyone in this group right now wants to work towards, right?
So there would be a deadline for anybody to submit a proposal that follows a certain template. Is that the suggestion here?
Yeah, follow the template and gets at least some feedback from the team.
Here would be my proposal: is that we do proposals maybe by tomorrow or Thursday. Maybe like we wait till after Christmas to actually do the snapshot, right? Then maybe throw them all up on the forum just for like, hey, is this like coherent and makes sense, and should it be included in a snapshot, right? I do think some like sense check or sanity check would be good. And then, proposals which people understand and make sense and don't seem totally crazy can go in a snapshot. In a rank choice snapshot, like as Poe suggests, right? And then people can rank them, and then we'll have an option or a decision.
Well, I mean, the other thing is 24 hours for whoever wants to submit a proposal. We take the current team proposal, those proposals, and then we do something what Poe is saying, which is basically take the compromise between all those proposals to present it in ranked choice votes.
That's too much. I mean, like, you could come up with another proposal that you think is the compromise between those proposals. But to me, every time we start trying to like cross arbitrate, everything gets all complicated and we spin into a bunch of decisions or questions, right? And so I think, I fully support somebody taking everything there and saying, hey, this is what I think everyone would like. I would support that everybody does that, right? Because that's what's going to pass. But I just think going back to like now, like 4 people are going to take input from 20 people and then put something out that's going to reflect everything that they said and they're going to be happy with isn't working. We've done a few iterations of that.
So then the other way to go about it would be then we vote on the model, put that through snapshot, vote on the parameters, put that through snapshot, and then what's left after that? Timing?
I think if we're going to do proposal voting, the parameter voting, the model has to be set first before we go through those numbers, because otherwise it's kind of like, oh, like, how are these even being used? And I guess the question is on the model, do we want to provide multiple options, or
a poll? And that doesn't seem so. Like, there's this first question: how to structure parameter by parameter, yes, no on a team proposal, or multiple complete proposals to select between. There's 4 parameter, 2 yes, no, and 10 multiple to select between. So like 12 to 4 on some sort of a complete proposal. And then we asked again, right? 1 proposal up down was 2, select between was 8, and figuring out model and snapshot and then parameters was 5. So to me, there seems to be, at least if this group is, there seems to be a consensus towards a few models, right? I'm just looking at what people have said. Maybe this isn't a good representation.
But see, so this is my concern. My concern here is that, a few people already mentioned on this call, it's pretty obvious that the greater community that's not included in these conversations nor has been affected is going to kind of look to what the quote unquote team proposal is. And they're most likely just going to be like, okay, sure. Like, even in this chat, Vipes is like, I default to Poe, right? Like, that's just naturally what's going to happen. Now we go all the way back to what everyone's been talking about not doing, which is having the team decide what this should look like. That's my beef with it. So it's like the team's going to put a proposal together and everyone's going to be like, okay, let's go with the team. They know what the hell's going on.
Right. So then the way to do it then is we put up a BIP that is just RemBadger, RemBTC, MTBTC.
Well, but now there's this MTBT plus RemBadger, right? You see?
Okay. Yeah, that can be one of the options as well. So that's 4 options. We vote on that and then go to parameter voting.
My challenge is, so again, for people in this room, it's easy to make that decision. But when you go to a snapshot asking people to pick between like one of these 4 options that endless hours talking about, I mean, we can try it outside the concept of everything else, right? I'm not sure that's super easy for most people to understand. But it's okay. Like, we can try that. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not the result of this call unless people want to change their votes. But right now, everybody seems to think they want multiple proposals, and yeah, and I guess people aren't worried about.
Do people in the chat? So the people in the chat agree or disagree with what I was suggesting? Because I feel like that's a genuine concern.
That's a good question. Okay, so then we don't want to just do multiple proposals that one's by the.
Well, hold on a second.
Yeah, well,
literally one person just said agree. Like,
yeah, and I think the question is like
Celsius.
if the quote unquote team and the larger group of affected whales kind of come to something that they both seem to make sense, do we feel like that people will be fine having a vote that is just like yes or no, like this proposal sucks, go back to it?
I personally, my opinion, and I'll just share this, is the group most affected, with of course anyone that wants else to participate, because everything's open and we've constantly been communicating to the greater community, should come up together with something that is then proposed, and like you said, a yes or no. Because again, no matter, I just don't think it's fair that the team does something, another group does something, and then we're all sitting here being like, what should we choose? And it's just gonna be a thing. Why don't we work together on it? I know we have already. I think we just got to be a little more focused and put some more deadlines around the decisions, right? Like, if we had an emoji vote, which model? The model that's being chosen, and then we do that in the channel, we can blast it out via the announcements. This is the model, read the details of the model. Which one do you vote for? Boom. That one gets included in the proposal. Do the same thing around the other parameters, put it together, gather feedback from everybody, and then from there move it to a forum vote. How does that sound for everybody?
Sounds good to me.
My question would just be, how long does everyone in this call think we need to take on this? Because so Poe has a strong opinion that 24 hours is too little. I have a strong opinion that this should be over with by January 1st.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I think more than anything, I just want to get back to building. Right? Go ahead.
I also just want to counter argue that one point that stood out to me here is that I think the community at large can appreciate that if the team who are the ones that have to implement and are basically voted into or assigned the well-being of the protocol for all of us, and those who have suffered from this exploit basically came up with something that is both good or acceptable for the victims and also acceptable for the protocol. I think the community can appreciate that, and it's not that they have, like, everybody feels to need to decide on every little itty bitty point. And I think if we basically give them or make some parameters or ranges up for votes, then I think everybody has the feeling to have had some influence on it. But there's only so many ways to skin a cat, right? There's not a whole bunch of options, not like a fucking buffet at some hotel, like, where you can choose between 28 different meals and sauces and some bread. It's just 3 different models, and the choice isn't really all that grand, right? And that's maybe it's a little bit of a shortcut, but
I just think, like, there's so many ways to skin a cat here, and let's just skin the cat already.
I agree with you too, that I feel the greater community would feel most trusted in a proposal that had the perspective of those most affected and the team that they could decipher to suggest has the protocol's best interest in mind. And I feel like that would resonate the most with the greater community, and also show an extreme level of fairness and unbiasedness towards the potential direction.
And I feel like we're already almost there, because we have so many
Agreed.
different sheets and suggestions floating around. We just need to come together.
So how do we
Combine
want to do
the
this?
BTC and Badger into one, and then that's it.
Do we want to? Go ahead, at 15. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is my suggestion, and then Spotty, you can say, is Wazix, is there some people that because you've told me that you guys have like a group together, is there 2 people, I would say, from that group that would want to work on this, would say like me, Poe, and John, because we don't want to run into the situation where we have too many cooks, right?
Yeah, that's true. Also, that group only has 2 people, because that's the natural limit of Discord, it seems. So we didn't even get everybody in the top 20 in, sadly. But yeah, SG is in this group, right? So we can probably take this back to the group and say, okay, let's.
I think that's a good idea. I think that's a great idea. If we had 2 individuals from the most affected group that, and you know, I can ping Celsius to have them be included in that if they want as well, right? And kind of leave it there. That then kind of act as the advocates for that group in a more weeded discussion with John Poe and 1500 to come up with something that is then presented to the greater community in Discord via the RFF, maybe for something along the lines of emoji voting or just feedback, and then from there moves to the forum. And that last piece, the emoji vote, is more for just temperature checking anyone that hasn't been as attuned or whatever it may be, but assuming most people would have already been in the loop, and then from there it can go to the forum.
Yeah, so if we could hit that, at least get it in the RFF, you know, in the next 2 days or something like that, then people can hopefully review it before or over Christmas, and then have, you know, next week to do the BIP and snapshot.
Yeah, I think, you know, SG brought it up, a few people brought it up, Trip brought it up, like this needs to be determined and finalized by January 1st in an official vote, for the purpose of, 1, building what's necessary to start restitution, along with having some more bandwidth for the team to focus on efforts to actually build Badger further, which obviously affects everyone in a positive way.
The one thing that I would ask is that we set some deadlines. And if there is not a snapshot by, you know, like that deadline, that then we just go through the parameters or find a way to get this done, right? Because I think I like it, but it sounds very much like we're going around a circle that we've already been around.
This will be fine. This will I think.
I'd say by Thursday.
I'd say by
Thursday we need something up there, John. By Thursday, if we have something up in the RFF, that's a proposal that technically could go to a forum post. And of course, if there's a bunch of feedback needs to be changed, that's different. But you know, let's assume with representatives from the most affected, different people on the team, and then the greater community having a chance to review before forum, it should check the boxes. And then, like you said, that goes in forum through the weekend. If it all, you know, pass mustard, it then will go to snapshot next week to be finalized before January 1st.
Okay, so I think the way to start this off then would be the team that is going to coordinate with us, some, you know, Wazix, Real Weapon Johnny, or SG, send us a starting document in the next, I don't know what you guys' sleeping schedules are like, but just like whenever, if you're about to go to sleep, then whenever you wake up, send me something. Or if you're awake, send me something before you go to sleep.
Do you want to open a group somewhere with those people, so we don't communicate across 15 channels?
I can make a group because I think I have everybody on my friends list.
If you want, I can make a private channel in the Discord, right? So that you guys can add and remove people and people can see it. Or would you rather just do it in a DM group? But
let's do in the Discord piece. Ultimately, we're going to like run into like, hey, it'd be nice to have like someone from teching here. And they're like, oh, now that's the 11th person. And then, damn it. So yeah, we just throw some roles on people. Yeah, and then a new group would be awesome.
Sounds good. I'll get that set up.
Channel or whatever.
And then John, you can add people to roles too, right? So Johnny can just
yeah.
John, sorry, Johnny popped up right when I said John.
I used to I used to be Johnny until I got a job. To drive it. Johnny No H though, it's completely different than this Johnny.
People used to call you Johnny No H.
Johnny No
Johnny
H.
No H.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say I really appreciate everyone jumping on this because this is not easy for anybody. You know, this is literally the last thing I think everyone wants to be a part of. But you know, we are all part of it, and I think everyone here, and I could just speak for the greater Badger contributor group. We're all committed to doing everything in our power to help really drive a restitution plan that obviously helps those most affected, along with creating a healthy environment for the DAO to prosper, so that it in turn can obviously better help with restitution, but also grow to its potential and things along those lines. So, but just wanted to say thanks to everybody that's been so active in the Discord, joining this call, and just putting their thoughts forward. And I feel like between the game plan that we have today and just the overall sentiment from everyone that's been chatting in the Discord, we can get to a point of restitution before the end of the year, at least a decision around what it could look like. Which, by the way, and some have said this, this in itself is unbelievably precedent setting. Not only the way that it's that it's an open community conversation, but very few to any companies in Web3 or not will go through something like this, have the ability to drive some type of restitution and live on, which seems to be the direction that Badger is moving towards, which is fantastic. So that in itself is going to be pretty monumental, and we're all a part of it. Although, as I said earlier, we probably didn't want to be a part of it. But yeah, so just thanks for everybody for joining this and being a part of it, and everyone on the team and everyone in the community. All right, everybody. I think we're good. We'll talk soon.